South Korea's ousted president has apologised to his supporters for failing to live up to their expectations. The Constitutional Court voted to remove Yoon Suk Yeol from office over his short-lived imposition of martial law last year, setting the stage for a snap election. For more on this, I'm joined live from Seoul by John Lee, the editor of Korea Pro. John, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Talk us through the myriad of reactions this decision has sparked over there.
Well, so far the reaction has been quite muted, more so than we actually anticipated. We initially anticipated some levels of protest and perhaps even low levels of violence to occur on the streets, but none of that happened. In fact, a lot of it was, especially from the conservative side, we've seen a lot of sorrowful resignations regarding this particular impeachment. Now, this makes Yoon the second president in South Korean history to have been impeached by the National Assembly and removed by the Constitutional Court within a span of 8 years. And this being the second conservative president. And so there's quite a lot of soul searching going on within the conservative bloc, especially with the elections coming up in about 60 days, especially considering the fact that the conservatives have not rallied around a single candidate to represent them in the next presidential election.
Now, John, in its decision, the court condemned Yoon for violating the country's constitution and posing a serious challenge to democracy by declaring martial law. How strong a message does this send in terms of how much power the president can wield?
This is as strong as messages could possibly go. The Constitutional Court made a unanimous decision, and during the ruling, they broke down all of the different arguments that Yoon and his lawyers made during the entire impeachment trial. That one of the arguments that the president had made, the former president had made, was that his martial law declaration was not so much as an attempt to suppress democracy, but rather to use it as a communication tool to inform the public about the kinds of legislative and governance paralysis because of what he perceived as opposition control of the National Assembly. But by breaking down all of his arguments and saying how they violated the Constitution and how the opposition's approach was strictly aligned with the law, the Constitutional Court just made a very clear demarcation as to what kinds of actions are executive overreach, and this will have a lasting impact going forward, as future presidents will be very careful not to cross that line.
Now, Yoon has since released a statement where he was very apologetic and he talked about how he regretted not living up to the expectations of his supporters. It seems to be the opposite of the picture that was painted of Yoon in court, of a man who basically did whatever he pleased and was, quote, stubborn to the core.
Well, that was definitely his reputation and image for a very long time. But that being said, Yoon, for all of his flaws and his, shall we say, questionable interpretations of the Martial Law Act, he has maintained his status as someone who abides by the law. And so he has accepted the Constitutional Court's ruling.
Now, you've said that the response there on the ground has been quite muted, but are we likely to see more protests from the pro-Yoon camp?
The protests will certainly continue, especially over the weekend. I mentioned earlier that the conservative camp is somewhat fragmented earlier, and that is definitely the case, especially among some of the more far-right members of the conservative bloc. And those groups, they will continue to protest going forward. But that being said, because of the unanimous decision made by the court, their protests will likely be constrained than it would have been otherwise.
Now, a presidential election has to be held within the next 60 days. Can the ruling People Power Party recover from what Yoon has done as president?
It is very unlikely that the ruling party can recover. If we look at the polls, the opposition leader, Lee, he is far ahead of the polls compared to anyone else. And the conservative bloc has not been able to rally around a single candidate. And there are other minority conservative parties that are also vying for influence within the bloc itself. And so it would take a miracle for the ruling party to be able to retain the presidency.
Now, I'd like to get your thoughts on some of the contenders who are likely to front up during this election. You've mentioned the ruling PPP party. Han Dong-hun looks like the top choice to lead the ruling party. He was a vocal opponent of Yoon's martial law move. Is that likely to help him or to hinder him?
I don't think Han Dong-un is going to be the standard bearer for at least this particular election. There are quite a number of people within the conservative base who feel that Han Dong-un was a traitor to the president, and so they might be looking toward candidates who might be more loyal to Yoon, such as the labor minister, who has been a very staunch defender of the president, and perhaps even some of the more far-right contenders. Han Dong-un might be the principal candidate, and he might have a political future in future elections, but I think this time around it would be very challenging for him to take over the mantle.
You mentioned briefly there that the opposition leader is enjoying a healthy lead in opinion polls at the moment, but even he has his own legal challenges, doesn't he?
He does have a significant number of legal challenges. There's this one case where he was just acquitted at the Seoul High Court, the appeals court, and that will go to the Supreme Court. But because of the 60-day window, there's a very good chance that he will be elected president before it actually goes to the Supreme Court. So despite his legal challenges, I think he's in the clear for the time being.
Well, John Lee will be watching everything very closely. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you.